He called her unfit, right there, on live TV. But what Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett did next, it left the whole room breathless, and Kash Patel completely exposed. No shouting, no insults, just a single recording. And the truth hit harder than a gavel. Because when someone tries to destroy your reputation in front of millions, do you stay silent, or do you fight back with evidence? If you've ever been talked down to, underestimated, or told you don't belong, this story will hit home. And if you believe in standing tall with grace and proof, not rage, then this one's for you. Before we dive in, tap that subscribe button and comment where you're watching from, because stories like this aren't just heard, they're remembered. It started with one word spoken with just enough edge to slice through the air like a knife. Unfit. That was it. That was all Kash Patel needed to say to flip the temperature in the room from warm procedural banter to sharp, palpable tension. And he didn't shout it. He didn't pound the table or raise his voice. No, he said it the way only a man seasoned in backroom politics and cloakroom games can, quietly, clearly, and with the full intent of humiliation. C-SPAN's cameras didn't zoom in, but they didn't need to, because the silence that followed was more deafening than any gavel bang. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She didn't reach for the mic. She didn't even move. She just looked at him. Not with anger, with calculation. To the casual observer, someone flipping channels, someone only half watching, it might have looked like a simple pause. But to those who understand Washington, who know what it means when a woman in power, especially a black woman, especially one without the political armor of a legacy name, pauses. That silence isn't uncertainty, it's preparation. And Jasmine was prepared. She had been for weeks, because this wasn't a surprise. No, the attack was predictable. The moment Patel's name had appeared on the hearing schedule, Jasmine had known what was coming. She'd told her staff, told Marcus, told Tanya, even joked about it the night before. He's going to say something reckless, she said, casually spooning out soup from a cardboard container in her office. Probably question my credentials, maybe even my intelligence. It's what men like him do when they feel their time is running out. Tanya, her chief of staff, had looked up from her laptop. You want to prep a rebuttal? Jasmine shook her head. No, I want to prep the truth. And the truth had a timestamp, a date, a file name, a source so clean, even Patel's best lawyers wouldn't touch it. It sat quietly on a USB drive, tucked into her leather case, right beside her committee notes and a photograph of her late grandfather, the man who taught her how to hold her dignity like a sword and a shield. The same man who'd once told her, sometimes, baby girl, you don't raise your voice, you raise the standard. And now, in this room, she wasn't just defending her honor, she was defending that standard. The hearing had started like most others. Stiff introductions, shuffling papers, reporters blinking under overhead lights, committee members half glancing at their tablets, murmuring to aides, pretending this wasn't just another performance for the cameras. Jasmine had kept her posture straight, her hands clasped, her notepad open. She had taken a deep breath before the first speaker began, reminding herself of something that had carried her through every battle, from local courtroom fights to the nation's capital. This is not about me. This is about what I represent. And she did represent something, more than constituents, more than a district. She represented every woman who'd been told she was too much or not enough. Every working-class kid who grew up on grit instead of connections. Every lawyer who passed the bar while working nights. Every voice that trembled the first time it spoke truth to power, but kept speaking anyway. So when Patel leaned forward, adjusted his microphone, and began his testimony, she didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She let him talk. And talk he did, with that smooth, diplomatic smugness that only Washington insiders seem to perfect after years of being insulated from consequences. His words were laced with coded dismissals, phrases like lack of institutional experience and troubling oversight patterns. And then he said it, directly, plainly. Frankly, it's concerning to see someone as inexperienced as Reputus Crockett leading questions in these matters. I believe it's fair to say she is unfit to serve on this panel in any meaningful national security capacity. The room didn't gasp. That would have been too cinematic. Instead, it froze. Staffers stopped typing. Pens stopped moving. The kind of stillness descended that only happens in moments of real consequence, when everyone instinctively knows they're witnessing something they'll be talking about for years. Jasmine's pen clicked once. She calmly drew a small line across her page. She didn't lift her head. Not yet. But, internally, she smiled, not out of arrogance, out of knowing. She knew exactly what was on that drive, knew what Patel had said weeks earlier during a closed-door session, knew that the clip sitting inside that USB was time-stamped, vetted, and verified. She knew because her team had triple-checked it, and she knew because it had come from someone unexpected, a young committee staffer named Ava who didn't want recognition, didn't want credit, didn't even ask for a meeting, just wanted the truth to matter. The file Ava had passed along was clear. No edits, no cuts. Just Patel, during an internal policy roundtable, saying in plain, admiring terms, "That Crockett memo is sharp, clean. Honestly, she's more prepared than half this committee." And that was before the hearing, before the cameras, before the theater. It was the real him, unguarded, authentic, and now caught. Jasmine knew the power of patience, knew that when someone tries to draw you into a brawl, the greatest act of control is not fighting the way they expect. So she waited. She didn't lash back. She didn't match his tone. She let the moment do its damage, and damage it did. The chair tried to pivot, motioning to the next questioner. But the tension couldn't be unspooled so quickly. People were watching now, really watching. Some were waiting for Jasmine to cry, to crack, to raise her voice, to walk out. But she did none of those things. She clicked her pen one more time, then looked up. Her expression unreadable, but her posture unmistakable. She wasn't just defending herself. She was preparing to lead. Because behind every attack like this, every insult hidden in policy language, there's a deeper truth. It's not just about undermining a woman's intelligence. It's about making her small. And Jasmine Crockett? She had never been smaller than the moment they underestimated her. That was the first mistake, and it was about to become Patel's last. 3 weeks before Patel ever uttered the word unfit, the real story had already begun, tucked away in the quiet corners of Capitol Hill, where truth rarely shouts. It whispers. And sometimes it comes from the mouths of the least powerful people in the room. Her name was Ava Kingsley, just 26 years old, fresh out of George Washington University, wide-eyed and overworked. She wasn't a power player. She wasn't on the evening news. She didn't even have a nameplate on her shared desk yet. But what she did have was a gift for listening. Ava had been tasked with routine clerical observation on what was supposed to be a low-risk, no-headline security briefing. Room 212B, deep inside the Capitol complex. Beige walls, humming fluorescent lights, bad coffee, and chairs that squeaked when you leaned too far back. It was one of those closed-door sessions where staffers yawned, consultants recycled language from policy memos, and everyone kept one eye on the clock. But Jasmine Crockett had shown up, not because she had to, but because she cared. She always did. And unlike so many others, she didn't show up to be seen. She showed up to ask, and ask she did. With sharp, cutting questions about metadata exemptions in surveillance legislation. She quoted directly from a 71-page amendment proposal, quoted it, word for word. And the room, used to nodding along with vague oversight chatter, shifted. Patel, who had been lounging back, suddenly sat up straighter. He chuckled, not mockingly, but with something close to surprise. "Didn't think she'd catch that," he muttered to another consultant near him. Then, the words that would later become the very cornerstone of his downfall, casually, without thinking, slipped out of his mouth like they meant nothing at all. "That Crockett memo? Sharp, cleaner than I expected. Honestly, she's more prepared than half this committee." It wasn't praise. Not really. It was more like a man realizing, too late, that the person he'd underestimated had already lapped him. And Ava, halfway through typing her notes, froze. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She glanced up, then typed it anyway, word for word. Not because she thought it was scandalous, but because, somewhere deep in her gut, she knew what it meant when someone showed their real face in a room they thought no one would remember. That night, Ava stayed late. The file sat untouched in the secure drive, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Something about the way he said it, the way he dismissed and complimented Jasmine in the same breath, made her skin crawl. She called her supervisor, whispered into the phone like she was afraid the walls would hear. "I think this matters," she said. Her voice was steady, even if her hands weren't. And that's how the recording landed in the inbox of Tanya Rhodes, Jasmine's chief of staff, 2 days later. Tanya didn't need to listen twice. She did anyway. She called Jasmine that night. "We've got gold," she said. Jasmine was standing barefoot in her kitchen, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, still in her work clothes. "What kind of gold?" she asked. Tanya played the clip. Silence. Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink, then let out a long, tired sigh. "He really said that?" Tanya didn't answer, didn't need to, and for a moment, Jasmine just stood there, coffee in hand, heart pounding, mind racing, not out of panic, but out of preparation, because she didn't need the world to hear it, not yet. She just needed to know that when the day came, and it would come, she would be ready. Ready not just to respond, but to prove. And proof was a rare commodity in Washington. So they loaded the file onto a $10 black USB from the corner office depot. No label, no flashy color, just tucked it between briefing folders and a leather-bound notebook. Jasmine kept it close, in her briefcase, sometimes in her coat pocket. She carried it like some people carry pepper spray, not to use recklessly, but to defend if cornered. Marcus joked about it once, grinning from across her office. "We've got a secret weapon in a plastic stick." Jasmine had smiled, not a big smile, a knowing one. "It's not a weapon," she said. "It's an insurance policy. Truth doesn't need to attack. It just needs to survive long enough to be heard." And it did survive, because Jasmine didn't leak it, didn't tweet it, didn't weaponize it for cheap points. She waited. Waited with the kind of poise that only comes from experience, from bruises, from being dismissed before and knowing exactly what happens next. Because she knew Patel would overplay his hand. She knew the moment he walked into that hearing room with his practiced smirk and calculated tone that his confidence wasn't strength, it was habit. And habits are predictable. So when he said it, unfit to serve, Jasmine didn't blink. She just clicked her pen. Because the truth was already sitting 3 feet from her, inside that unassuming flash drive, ready to break the room open. In the days leading up to the hearing, she played it once or twice again. Not to remind herself of his words, but to study her own reaction. Calm, focused, controlled. She didn't plan a dramatic reveal, didn't script out a mic drop moment. That wasn't her style. She wasn't interested in becoming a viral clip. She wanted clarity. She wanted contradiction. She wanted consequence. The morning of the hearing, she arrived early. She walked into the Longworth building with no entourage, no press team, no extra flair, just her leather case in one hand and her grandmother's cross necklace tucked into her blouse. She sat alone for a while before the others arrived. Let the silence of the room steady her. It wasn't nerves, it was reverence. Because moments like these, where truth is poised to collide with lies, deserve stillness. Patel arrived like a man ready to dominate. His stride was loose, his tie perfect. He greeted committee members with that politician's handshake, the kind that feels firm but leaves no impression. When he made eye contact with Jasmine, it lingered just long enough to assert ego. She didn't return it, didn't flinch, just nodded once, a signal to herself that the game was about to begin. He started slow, framing statements, historical references, oversight theories, and then the pivot, then the dig, then the moment everyone would remember. Frankly, it's concerning to see someone as inexperienced as Representative Crockett leading questions in these matters. I believe it's fair to say she is unfit to serve on this panel in any meaningful national security capacity. The air dropped, the energy shifted. And Jasmine? She reached into her case. She didn't rush. She didn't blink. She simply asked the chair for permission to introduce a relevant clip. The chair hesitated, not because he doubted her, but because he already sensed the floor was about to collapse under Patel's feet. "You may proceed," he said. And just like that, history cracked open. Jasmine plugged in the USB, paused, looked at Patel, and pressed play. The room filled with his voice. "That Crockett memo is sharp, cleaner than I expected. Honestly, She's more prepared than half this committee. Once, then again. Silence followed. Patel tried to speak, stammered, reached for language that could soften the blow. That was out of context. Your words, Jasmine said, calm, precise. Same voice, same panel, same subject. She unplugged the USB, closed her folder, sat back, and let the silence do what her voice didn't need to. Everyone in that room heard it, but more importantly, they felt it. It wasn't just the contradiction that burned. It was the proof of how quickly truth gets buried when power thinks it won't be challenged. And this time, it was. Because sometimes, all it takes to break the game is a single flash drive and a woman who refuses to back down. For a moment, after the audio ended, the room didn't breathe. There were no gasps, no shouting, no theatrical gestures, just the kind of silence that says everything words can't. The truth had landed, and it didn't explode like a bomb. It sank like a weight into the chests of everyone listening. Kash Patel sat frozen, staring blankly across the table, his fingers clenched too tightly on the microphone he no longer dared to touch. Across the panel, lawmakers who had until then maintained a casual neutrality suddenly looked alert, some shifting in their chairs, others glancing sideways, as if silently checking with one another. Did you hear that? Did we all just hear that? Jasmine, meanwhile, didn't gloat. She didn't smile, didn't lean back, didn't let her voice rise in triumph. That wasn't her style. Her power wasn't in performance, it was in presence. She simply uncapped the USB, tucked it back into her folder with the kind of reverence someone might show when folding a flag, and looked up, locking eyes with the chairman. No further comment at this time, she said evenly. Her voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable undercurrent of certainty, a groundedness that spoke to years of having to prove herself without theatrics. The chairman cleared his throat, visibly caught off guard by the emotional gravity now pressing down on the room. Mr. Patel, he said, his tone strained but formal. Do you have a response to the audio presented by Representative Crockett? Patel shifted in his seat, his face rigid, his polished demeanor cracked. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, to deny, to spin. But he also knew, the moment he did, the clip would play again and again and again, not just in the hearing room, but on television screens, social media feeds, and podcasts across the country. I don't recall the context of that statement, he finally stammered, his voice brittle. It may have been a different situation entirely. Jasmine spoke again, not looking at him now, but rather addressing the room, every word measured and grounded. The context, she said, was a classified committee briefing 6 weeks ago. Mr. Patel was speaking in a closed-room session attended by bipartisan staffers, with full security clearance and audio logs confirmed by 2 separate oversight offices. That recording was reviewed and verified for authenticity by House counsel. The statement was made under no pressure, no prompting. It was an honest reflection of Mr. Patel's professional assessment of my qualifications. She paused, letting her words settle like dust in the air. It stands in direct contradiction to the narrative he chose to present today. And with that, the room shifted again, not loud, but visceral. The balance of power had turned, not with shouting or grandstanding, but with precision, with preparation, with patience. A few seats down, Representative Judith Beal, one of the longest-serving members on the panel and rarely one for confrontation, leaned slightly into her mic. Mr. Chairman, she said softly, I think it's important to acknowledge what we've just heard, not just as a contradiction, but as a reflection of how political theater can obscure factual analysis. This hearing is about oversight, yes, but it's also about integrity. And I believe what was demonstrated today by Representative Crockett is the very definition of professional preparation and respect for the committee process. Her words weren't dramatic, but they cut deeper than any raised voice. Patel didn't respond. He couldn't, and he knew it. Behind Jasmine, Marcus sat still, hands clasped, his face expressionless but his heart pounding. He'd seen her prepare, seen the long hours, the tireless rehearsals, the stress that came from always being one step ahead, just to be treated as equal. And now, watching her not just defend herself, but expose the quiet rot in how people like Patel operated, He felt something rare in that building, pride without fear. He didn't smile, didn't move, but he knew. Something had shifted, and not just for Jasmine. When the chair called for a 10-minute recess, people didn't rush out of the room like they usually did. They sat still, processing, recalibrating, trying to find the right words to describe what they'd just witnessed. Some whispered, some stared at their phones, no doubt watching the clip already making its rounds. A C-SPAN producer whispered to his assistant, "Clip it, that's the headline." Patel stood slowly, but he didn't walk confidently like he had earlier. His body language had changed. Shoulders slumped, jaw clenched, eyes darting. Not the swagger of a political tactician, but the retreat of a man who realized too late that arrogance without preparation is a liability. Jasmine remained seated. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't join the small groups quietly buzzing near the exits. She sat with her hands folded, the same way she had before Patel had called her unfit, and the same way she would sit long after the headlines faded. Because for her, this wasn't a win. It wasn't a viral moment. It was proof. Proof that doing the work still mattered. Proof that truth, when handled carefully, deliberately, and respectfully, could cut through even the most sophisticated lies. Down the hall, as Patel passed through the rotunda, reporters flooded toward him, microphones extended, cameras blinking like sirens. "Mr. Patel, do you stand by your earlier comments?" "Mr. Patel, was your testimony in conflict with your previous statement?" "Mr. Patel, do you think you owe Representative Crockett an apology?" He didn't respond, just kept walking, jaw set, lips tight, his security team clearing a path through the growing swarm. But the damage was done. The story had escaped the building. In a suburban living room in Ohio, a retired Navy vet named Harold watched the clip twice. His wife, Janice, paused folding laundry to join him. "That young woman," Harold murmured. "She didn't even raise her voice." Janice nodded. She didn't have to. In a small diner outside Tulsa, a group of senior women who gathered every Thursday to talk politics watched the moment unfold on a cracked iPad. One of them, Mabel, a former middle school teacher in her 70s, tapped the screen gently and whispered, "That's what accountability looks like." And in a community center in Baton Rouge, a civics teacher replayed the clip for a group of high schoolers, telling them to write down what Jasmine said, verbatim, as an example of what it means to be prepared in the face of character assassination. Back inside the Capitol, Jasmine made her way quietly to her temporary office. She passed no reporters, took no victory laps. Her phone buzzed over and over, but she ignored it. She didn't want distraction. She wanted clarity. Marcus caught up to her at the door, eyes wide, but face measured. "You good?" he asked. She nodded once. "Better than good. I'm centered." Inside, Tanya was already scrolling through emails, dozens from members, aides, advocacy groups, and citizens who had watched the moment and reached out in support. "I haven't seen inboxes light up like this since the January hearings," she said. Jasmine raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She dropped her folder onto the desk, pulled out the USB, and placed it gently into the top drawer. Not because she needed to keep it secret, but because its job was done, for now. Later that day, after the building began to empty and the adrenaline faded, Jasmine sat alone at her desk. She didn't open Twitter. She didn't scan headlines. Instead, she wrote in her personal journal, something she rarely had time to do anymore. She wrote not about Patel, not about the hearing, but about her father, a steelworker who taught her that dignity wasn't just something you wore on the outside. It was forged in silence, held together by restraint, powered by the certainty that if you just held your ground long enough, the truth would find its moment. She closed the notebook, and for the first time in days, smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the news cycle, just for herself. Because the truth hadn't just spoken, it had been heard. The hearing was over, but the reckoning had only just begun. While the committee called for recess and the members filed out with controlled expressions and fast-tapping phones, the real noise was already beginning to echo far beyond Capitol Hill. Within 20 minutes of the gavel dropping, the audio clip had been clipped, captioned, and uploaded to 3 different political TikTok accounts, 2 major Twitter feeds, and a veteran-run YouTube commentary show based in Nebraska. The clip wasn't flashy. It didn't have background music or dramatic zooms. It was just Patel's voice playing on loop, saying the words he never thought would surface. She's more prepared than half this committee. And then silence. The kind of silence that makes a viewer freeze because it doesn't feel like a moment. It feels like a shift. On CNN, the story broke by 3:08 p.m. Eastern Time. By 3:27, Fox News had run a neutral banner under the clip, recording shows contradiction in Patel's testimony. On MSNBC, an analyst said, "That's the cleanest exposure I've seen in years. Evidence dropped like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer." In the social media void where rage and sarcasm usually fought for dominance, a strange new sentiment took over. Respect. Comments poured in. "She didn't even raise her voice. That's class. This is how you beat arrogance, with receipts and composure. I want my daughter to see this. The last 10 years of my military career, I never saw anyone hold a room like that." In South Carolina, a retired judge paused his wood chopping to replay the clip on his phone. He watched it 3 times before calling his wife out from the kitchen. "Come see this," he said. "This is what honesty looks like when it's fed up." In an Iowa school library, a civics teacher added Jasmine Crockett's name to the wall of civic leaders of today beside Eleanor Holmes Norton and Barbara Jordan. And across dozens of Sunday churches, conservative and progressive alike, parishioners passed phones under pews during lunch hour Bible study whispering, "You gotta see this woman." But Jasmine wasn't watching any of that. She was still in her office. The door was closed, the lights were low, and the buzz of the outside world hadn't touched her yet. Tanya sat across from her, her laptop open but forgotten, her eyes fixed on Jasmine like she was trying to process what they had all just lived through. "You know they're going to come at you harder after this," Tanya said. Jasmine nodded. "I know." "Like, harder. They're not going to forgive that you made them look like that." Jasmine leaned back slightly, folded her arms, and said, "I didn't make them look like anything. They did that on their own. I just pressed play." Marcus entered quietly with 3 cups of hot coffee, handed one to each of them, then leaned against the wall like a man who had spent the whole day watching a storm swirl outside his window. "Phones are melting out there," he said. "Your clip already has more traction than any full hearing in the last 6 months. Patel's team tried to get a response together, but every reporter who covered it heard the same thing we did. They're not biting." Jasmine took a sip of her coffee, let the heat steady her breath, and replied, "Good, I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this so people like Ava know the quiet ones matter too." Tanya smiled. "That intern has no idea she just gave the country its first viral audio takedown by a black congresswoman." "She will," Jasmine said. "I'm calling her tonight." And she did. After the office cleared out, after the calls slowed, after the adrenaline ebbed into that strange mix of relief and anticipation, Jasmine pulled out her phone, found Ava's number, and hit call. The young woman picked up on the second ring, breathless. "Representative Crockett," Jasmine smiled. "You can call me Jasmine now." Ava laughed nervously. "I can't believe it worked. I mean, I knew it was important. Jasmine interrupted her gently. "You listened when it counted. That's more than most people do in this town. You trusted your gut. And I want you to remember that when people try to talk over you." Ava didn't say anything for a moment, but Jasmine could hear her breathing, steady, emotional. "Thank you for using it right," Ava whispered. "Thank you for not turning it into a weapon." "Truth doesn't need to be a weapon," Jasmine said. "It just needs to be loud enough to interrupt the lie." That night, Jasmine didn't go to bed. Not right away. She sat on the edge of her window seat in her DC apartment, looking out over the city she had fought so hard to be part of. She thought about her grandfather again, the one who used to say that real strength wasn't measured in titles, but in how you carried the burden of being doubted. She thought about her mother, who used to cry when Jasmine was belittled on TV, but now called her every week just to say how proud she was. She thought about the young girls watching from places Jasmine had never even heard of, seeing for the first time that maybe, just maybe, grace and grit could coexist. And most of all, she thought about the generations before her who had walked into rooms not built for them and made away anyway. She felt them with her tonight. All of them. Not in a metaphorical sense. In a real, spiritual way. Like their breath was in the air. Like their fingerprints were on that USB. Like their prayers had steadied her hand as she pressed play. When the sun rose over the Capitol the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Crockett exposes Patel's double standard. Receipts don't lie. A congresswoman just redefined poise under pressure. But Jasmine didn't read any of them. She had other things to do. She had another hearing to prepare for, another bill to write, another group of constituents flying in who needed their voices heard. Because for her, this wasn't about a clip. This wasn't about a takedown. This was about discipline, about showing people that strength doesn't always shout. It often whispers, then waits for the right moment to speak. She stepped out into the hallway, blazer crisp, shoes polished, eyes clear. She passed a few colleagues who offered silent nods of respect, the kind they never gave her before. She passed a security guard who whispered, "You did good yesterday, ma'am." And she passed two young interns in suits too big for them, who looked at her like she had just carved a path in the marble beneath their feet. At her next hearing, no one interrupted her. No one questioned her preparedness. Even the opposition looked wary, like they now understood she wasn't just a name on a seat, she was a force. But Jasmine never looked smug. She never coasted. Because she knew one moment didn't define a legacy. It revealed it. That afternoon, she sat down for a one-on-one interview with a local New Hampshire station. The anchor asked, "Did you know how big this would become?" Jasmine shook her head. "No, but I knew the truth needed to speak." The anchor leaned in. "And now that it has?" Jasmine smiled slightly, her voice quiet but firm. "Now we get back to work. There's always more work." Across the country, in homes and community centers, in veterans' lodges and women's prayer circles, in classrooms and barbershops, people weren't just talking about the contradiction she exposed, they were talking about the way she exposed it, without rage, without noise, with dignity, with facts, with something rare in American politics, grace under fire. In her inbox that evening was an email from a retired Republican staffer. It read, "I don't agree with most of your politics, but I watched that clip twice, and I just wanted to say, you did something that reminded me why this process matters. That was real. That was needed." Jasmine forwarded it to Marcus. The subject line said only, "This is why." By Friday evening, the clip had settled into the bloodstream of the country. It wasn't trending anymore, not in the flashy way things burn hot and then vanish. No, it had gone deeper than that. This wasn't a wildfire. This was a seed. And it was taking root in places that didn't usually engage with politics at all, not because they didn't care, but because they'd stopped believing there was anything in it worth believing in. Until now. In Akron, Ohio, a woman named Gloria sat at her kitchen table with her grandson and played the clip again on her tablet. She'd taught civics for 35 years and thought she'd seen it all, until she saw Jasmine Crockett let a man hang himself with his own words without ever raising her voice. "That's how you hold your ground," she whispered, "not with volume, with weight." In a community church in Montgomery, a retired deacon stood up during testimony and referenced the moment. "The Lord said, 'Let the truth be your shield, not your sword.' That sister walked into the lion's den and let her shield do the work." And in a school auditorium in Phoenix, a teacher played Jasmine's response for a group of restless 11th graders. The kids were used to chaos, scandal, memes. But for 2 minutes, they sat still. Because even they could tell something rare had happened. Not because someone shouted, but because someone didn't. Jasmine wasn't chasing cameras. She wasn't making the rounds on cable news. She turned down 3 major interview requests that week, politely. "This isn't about press," she told Marcus. "This is about precedent." In her heart, she knew that moments like this, real moments, were sacred. You didn't sell them. You honored them. And maybe, just maybe, you let them breathe long enough to change something deeper than a headline. In her district back home, the reaction was overwhelming. Her office received more calls that week than any week prior, most of them not from political donors or pundits, but from everyday people, nurses, veterans, grandmothers, truck drivers. One handwritten letter from a woman in Arkansas read, I've been made to feel unfit my whole life. Watching you didn't just make me proud, it made me feel seen. Jasmine kept that letter, framed it, hung it in the back of her office, near the window, where the sun touched it every morning. At Sunday service in D.C., Jasmine walked in quietly, sat near the back, bowed her head. She didn't need to be recognized. She needed to exhale. After the benediction, an elderly woman approached her. Gray curls, trembling hands, eyes still sharp with memory. "You reminded me of Barbara Jordan," she said. Jasmine's breath caught for a second. "Not because of the voice," the woman added, "but because of the silence you let settle. That kind of silence has power." Jasmine left the service with a heart heavier than usual, but not in a burdensome way. It was full of the weight of what had just happened. Full of the understanding that she had done something that couldn't be undone, not by spin, not by partisanship, not even by time. She returned to her apartment late that night. The city outside was soft, the kind of quiet only DC knew how to offer after a storm of cameras and press. Jasmine made a cup of tea, sat in her chair by the window, and finally opened the video file on her laptop, not to rewatch it, but to listen to it without watching it. Just sound, just breath, just truth. Patel's voice, then her own, and then the silence. She closed the laptop, stood slowly, and whispered into the quiet, "It's done." But in truth, it wasn't, because that moment would outlive the headline. It would show up in law school lectures, in youth retreats, in parent-child conversations about strength and restraint, in future campaign ads, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. That calm can be defiance. That dignity can dismantle deceit. That truth, when it arrives quiet and steady, can be louder than any lie ever screamed. In the following weeks, committee sessions returned to normal, or at least tried to. Patel didn't return, not to that panel. Rumor was, his office was restructuring. Jasmine didn't speak of it again. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own verdict, and everyone knew it. At a town hall in her district, a man in his 70s raised his hand to ask a question. His voice shook a little. "Congresswoman," he said, "I just wanted to say, I've seen a lot of folks try to look tough in these hearings, but you didn't look tough. You looked unshakable, and I needed that." Jasmine placed a hand on her heart. "Thank you, sir. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is just not move when they expect us to fall." And then came the standing ovation. Not loud, but lasting. It came from people who didn't usually clap. It came from people who knew the sound of struggle and the stillness of survival. It came from a country that, for one brief, beautiful moment, had been reminded of what it looks like when the truth doesn't yell. It stands. To every viewer still here, still listening, this story isn't just about politics. It's not about Congress, not even about Jasmine Crockett or Kash Patel. It's about something deeper. It's about you. It's about every time someone doubted your worth, every moment someone dismissed you before they even heard you speak, every hallway you walked down with your head held high while others whispered, every room you entered where someone tried to make you small and failed. This story is your reminder that you don't have to shout to be powerful, that you don't have to attack to be right, that your proof, your work, your words, your wisdom is your answer. And when the time comes, let it speak. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own dignity, your own fight, your own moment of being underestimated, share it, like it. Comment below and tell us, have you ever been called unfit, but stood anyway? And if you believe that truth doesn't always need a microphone, but it does need a witness, then subscribe. Because this channel exists to remind you that in a world full of noise, quiet strength still echoes. We see you, and we're not done telling these stories. Not by a long shot.